Hey, this is June 10th, Sunday, 2 in the morning, and I thought I would make a follow-up regarding a series of videos I did about processing the toxic emotions from a sexual assault. I was reading up on a mandatory reporter law regarding DHS in the state of Oregon. So the Oregon Revised Statutes, or ORS, and keeping keeping that in mind, it really clarified my perspective to realize, well, I was dealing with very personal toxic emotions. In the bigger picture, if one were a Department of Human Services employee or any of these designated mandatory reporters, one would be concerned about that assault and the components of the assault, including intimidation under threat of transmission of a sexually transmitted disease, non-consensual violence, pinning down, restricting of movement. And for someone with that propensity to be in a position of closeness to disabled, vulnerable persons, it would be an absolute immediate mandatory reporter kind of issue. And what didn't happen, unfortunately, the first person who I reported it to was the only female I knew who worked in that group. And her position, as I understand it now, was as a part-time volunteer, whereas she was employed on another side of the facility. And in an absolute sense, when I reported what I reported to her, the seriousness of it would arise to a mandatory reporter status. And I think that people frequently feel like, oh, well, that's just a private secret, and I'm going to privately respect that. But if, for instance, things had proceeded apace, of course, I also reported to the person who did this to me in October, completely coming out after multiple attempts to gain closure and explanation for why that actually even happened. So if he had respected his role in a mandatory reporting, it's almost like, how can you be a mandatory reporter and a predator and abuser at the same time? And it's been mind-boggling, but I felt a lot of clarity last night when I was reading the Oregon Revised Statute, some mandatory reporter law for DHS employees. That's where I started, at the DHS website for the state of Oregon. And it's almost like I felt a lot of maturity in my own mind to know that what was very much sort of like going through an unknown forest, you've never been through these deep emotions. The deepest emotion I was feeling is that there must be safety, there must be leadership, there must be accountability, there must be protection, and on a deeper, more like women-men angle, I see this great disparity of this huge amount of power, position, authority, status, money, salary that he is given, whereas I, or someone like me, or any of his other victims, are ostracized, excluded, stigmatized, blamed, in a sense, ridiculed and ostracized by society for male crime, male violence. And the fact that I don't feel safe attending any of the facilities. That forms a basis of exclusion. And this is not Saudi Arabia, this is America. But when men perpetrate violence and then try to enact a code of secrecy to protect that violence, and then continue to maintain improperly allocated positions of power in defiance of their duty to be a mandatory reporter. It's very, very sexist, clearly, but hopefully, I'm not sure I can say that, hopefully the mechanisms in place will work. I also read up a little bit, I tried to do a little research on specifically herpes, because I think in the range of STDs, possibly AIDS has the most notoriety for being transmitted, and also because there was no completed rape. There was a sexual assault pinned down with him rubbing himself on me through his clothing. But because he had told me about this disease, I realized the fear of his disease was operating in my mind throughout this incident. And when I went through the fear of his sexual aggression and violence and pin down and restriction of my movement, I wonder about, is that part of an attack with an intimidation about any kind of STD or that specific STD? Does that add an additional element of a crime? Because it added quite a lot of fear to me, because I just don't particularly want that particular disease. Oh. I've tried to, in the last month, encapsulate in my mind very crystal clear that there was no friendship, there was grooming. There was predatory grooming. There were propositions and offers and quid pro quo, like, oh, you could work at Coast Radio, the Astoria radio station, with me in my DJ gig. Like, oh, you. And then when his offer came of, oh, you can work at the Bob Chisholm Community Center senior meals, that came after the assault. It came in the presence of one of his other victims / co-worker. And I realized that that was kind of like a placating me, trying to tell me, oh, everything's cool. If you'll just act chill, then you can come be my little volunteer and we can brush this under the rug and pretend we're all like friends after I've already attacked you once. So, twice. But I realized that had a normalizing value in front of his coworker to make it seem as if he and I had some kind of mutual friendship of some kind of trustworthy basis. And that was not the case, because my mind immediately started thinking, oh, will he be attacking me there? Or will he be attacking other people? Or, I mean, even so much as like in a closet, in a broom closet, in a bathroom, will I be safe? And because I had seen how predatory and pushy and gropey he was, and dangerously, assaultive, restrictive, and mean, and bruising my arm, I'm like, oh. And what I wish, when I go back through it in my mind, I wish I had been able to completely reach out to this woman who worked with him to make sure she was okay. But fortunately, we exchanged numbers and I found her quickly, and then told her as soon as I felt comfortable enough with her to tell her that. But it really fell on deaf ears for that moment, because she said, oh, he would never do that. And the not being believed and not being listened to. What I discussed with Skylar Archibald was that if there is no mechanism in place that is open to victims to come forward. If all the hierarchy of power is all male, that puts an additional burden on a female victim of sexual harassment or groping or assault to feel that there is even a way to get through or be taken seriously or be treated kindly or listened to. So, I mean, he was very nice and tried to be very understanding, but it was very difficult speaking to him, and it became a part of my being silenced was the fact that when I did research to try to understand one of the only people that I thought that I would feel safe telling is a front desk lady who just seems like a cool lady. And I still may talk to her because I think she may actually have the breakthrough that the male figureheads can't figure out. And I feel rather blown off by them, by the radio. And I wonder why they won't communicate with me other than they maybe are afraid to. They're either afraid to, or they've placated themselves into thinking that everything has been settled satisfactorily. And I wonder how Northwest Senior Disability Services is doing. I wonder how they're doing, how they're handling it. But I did notice when I looked at their job openings that they are making note of an employee for a flex position between counties would need to have mandatory reporter philosophy understanding of what that is in their requirement for that job. And then I looked even on other counties that are not this county, and that's also being required for that job in senior meals. So that lets me know that they know that that's a thing. And if, for instance, with the information that I was given in this attack, that he has a dangerous and violent side, frighteningly violent side, if I were to not speak and contact authorities or attempt to broker for anyone else's safety, if I were a mandatory reporter, it would be an offense. It would be illegal for me not to report. I would become an accessory to protecting his criminality. And with that in mind, it was kind of such a point of clarity with me, where I just realized that I'm absolutely needed to get this out there. And it's very good that I've done so. It's absolutely right. And it's absolutely not my fault that I was put in that position. It was kind of a relief just to have the moral clarity, because I think it's in my heart and I've had to act on that before. Like, for instance, for other people's safety, but this particular situation was just agonizingly painful. But it's the right thing to do. So I think that's like the hope through that. Everything's moving too slowly.